Hey, Dr. Marc Hensel. He's a research assistant professor and coastal ecologist with a joint appointment here at the University of Florida between the Nature Coast Biological Station and the Department of Soil, Water, and Ecosystem Science. Dr. Hensel is a proud Gator alum. He got his bachelor's and master's here at the University of Florida in zoology and also is a Florida native. He then spent some time up at UMass Boston for his PhD and completed a postdoc at Virginia Institute of Marine Science. His research focuses on preparing coastal management for the future by quantifying how both climate and non-climate stressors reshape the landscape of interactions that power biodiversity and resilience. He enjoys working with regional stakeholders on applied questions to both develop and evaluate local management strategies that mitigate climate change effects. He works on megafauna, biodiversity, predators, and coastal conservation across marshes, underwater grasses, mangroves, oyster, and coral reefs in the Gulf, Caribbean, and U.S. Atlantic coasts. And his approach integrates natural history and experimental field ecology with quantitative synthesis of large spatiotemporal data sets that mechanistically link pattern and process across scales, which you're going to hear a great example of his work doing that today. And so with that, I will yield the floor to you, Dr. Hensel.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Savannah. You're gonna have to figure out what you want to do. Put on noise canceling headphones because I know you're gonna be able to hear me both directions. Also, I need to have a different picture if I'm gonna have my gray beard next to the juxtaposed with that, one of me being so young. All right. Cool. Okay. Thanks so much for the intro, Savannah. Yeah, really excited to be here today. Um, So I need to click in the right spot. Here we go. All right, so I like to start my talks with my acknowledgments. So of course, funding sources for a lot of this work, some really important local and regional funders got us going on it. My collaborators, some of which are the hosts of this seminar, really appreciate your support, and to my students, we've been really busy over the last year and a half together here at UF, and yeah, I'm excited to share with all of y'all the stuff that we've learned from trudged around the marshes and diving in the seagrasses and climbing through the mangroves. So, as as some of you in the audience know, I when I'm giving a talk on change and shifting conditions, I like to start with this quote from Galadriel, the beginning of the Lord of the Rings movies. The world has changed. I feel it in the water. I feel it in the earth. I smell it in the air. Much that once was is lost, for none now live who remember it. And I think that it's pretty clear that what she's talking about here is how the combination of climate and non-climate human impacts are now creating unique challenges for the management of natural resources. And the reason is that global change is rewriting the ecological rule book. And people who've learned those rules, well, the rule book's out to date. That's the for none now live who remember it part. So this is especially true for coastal ecosystems where the climate and non-climate aspects of global change are creating novel environmental conditions, potentially unfamiliar to the genetic memory of organisms. And so basically what this means is that, out on the Gulf Coast, a seagrass or a spotted sea trout or a blue crab could be experiencing hotter and cloudier waters than it ever has. And it's not just the environment that's changing, but the players are changing too, because new species are coming into prominence with global change, whether it be invasions or extinctions, or range shifts like mangroves shifting up north away from the poles, or snook as well. So it's this combination of new stressors, unique stressor interactions with new species or shifting dominance that creates a lot of uncertainty for how ecosystems work. Now, knowing the rules, so to speak, this is the backbone of good wildlife and habitat management. And so with this little diagram, habitat management kind of comes in right here to make it so that all this change doesn't have such a novel effect, right? And it's the same sort of thing with habitat restoration, where we try to turn these conditions into something that doesn't create uncertainty but creates resilience. And so the question is, if the ecological rule book is changing, how do we adjust the management and the restoration blueprint? And this is difficult because, good predictions, good management, this is built from a detailed knowledge of the past. And, climate scientists tell us that the future is going to look really different from the past. So how do we handle this? So I'm going to share some examples and thoughts on this from some of my research in coastal seagrasses, along the way pointing out how interdisciplinary techniques and partnerships and big ideas are needed to create more management wins. And then I'm going to end with some what I think are some good rules for how we can start staying ahead of everything, sharing examples of stuff that my lab's been working on over the last year and a half. So seagrasses are a fantastic ecosystem to kind of tackle this, the importance of change, how change is happening and what it means. Seagrasses are really important. They cover, every ocean except for the Arctic, although that's potentially going to even change soon. There's a lot of things to love about seagrasses. Personally, my favorite is the little fish darting in and out of the seagrass blades. Young predators feasting on amphipods and snails, rays eating clams and scallops, omnivorous pinfish with their shiny sides as they graze the epiphytic algae. Seagrasses are the best nursery habitat of all coastal ecosystems. And the reason why is that dense, tall seagrasses support abundant and diverse fish communities. I'm really excited to be able to show data in this. The first data that I show in this talk is from the Nature Coast Aquatic Reserve. This is from some work led by my grad student Alex Wallace and my biological scientist Shay Husband. And what we found through otter trawls in the turtlegrass meadows out there is that as canopy height or grass blade thickness increases, you get higher abundance, higher species diversity, right? Great example of that. So, one of the reasons why I really like studying seagrasses and why they're great for the kinds of questions that my lab tackles is that seagrass physiology and evolutionary history dictates how we should manage them. So what do I mean by that? Well, underwater grasses, they're not plants that stayed in the ocean 450 million years ago, but seagrasses, rather, they recolonized the water 100 million years ago, right? And that was a tough move on them. It was right in the middle of the school year. They had to make all new friends. It was a really difficult time. No, but seriously, the oxygen-starved sediment in water, right? This is deadly to plants. So the grasses, they modify their environment by becoming living pumps that move oxygen into the soil. And this takes a lot of energy, and it means that underwater plants need more sunlight than those on land. Seagrasses need more light than almost any other plant on Earth, and their survival hinges on clear water. When conditions are right, seagrasses can grow into huge underwater meadows, can be restored by seed. And this sort of evolutionary history tells us that water quality is potentially the easiest seagrass management lever to pull. This is a quote from one of my mentors in the Chesapeake Bay, Bill Dennison. Of course, you can tell that his job is to communicate complicated environmental issues to policymakers and managers because it's more complex than this. But we've got some pretty cool examples of this. And so now I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about these two examples. First in the Chesapeake Bay, where I did my postdoc, and then also in the Tampa Bay, which is where I'm from. And so by in the 1970s, the residential and industrial development, dumping of literally untreated sewage, industrial waste, this was something that was a problem in both of these bays. The communities in both Tampa and in the Chesapeake Bay got together and acted. And so literally, grassroots community involvement got this stuff going. And so in the Chesapeake Bay, what they started was what they call a pollution diet, where they target point sources, agriculture with cover crops, riparian buffers, to put the bay on a diet, right? In Tampa, they enacted it was the Wilson-Griswold Act. It was targeting wastewater, deposition from power plants, stormwater, enacted fertilizer ordinances, and then importantly, they monitored these results, right? And this is a really cool example because the waters, they did become more clear, and from this monitoring data, that's how we found that. And then also they were monitoring underwater plants too. And so did this translate to seagrasses? And the answer is a resounding yes. By 2016, despite demperature rise and human population doubling in both of these bays, seagrasses recovered either the 1950s levels or the levels not before recorded in the Chesapeake Bay. And so this is a really cool example of how local action can mitigate the effects of global change. And this was the blueprint that we've been using, since the EPA was formed, right? We notice something, we act, and the system recovers. So when I was in the Chesapeake, our manager partners at the Chesapeake Bay program, they're the ones who worked with local, regional, national governments to set that pollution diet. They asked us, will this continue to work, right? Do the rules still apply? And so this was a project that I did with Lou Linker, who's the head of the Chesapeake Bay program modeling team. This is what it looks like to do data science. And so what we did is we got together and assembled water quality data, watershed data, and built these mechanistic models of the past. And then I combined them with his climate and hydrological projection models to start to look into the future. And so what I'm going to show here are the results from some of those predictions. These are like bands of predictions, basically, where all possible 1,000 scenarios are in these bands. And what we can see is that if we continue the pollution diet, we expect to get 6,500 more acres of grass by 2060. So that's pretty cool, right? But the problem is this actually still puts us way under our goal that was set in 1984. So what's going on here, right? What I usually like to say is that there's a pretty clear cause and effect where the grandfather of Chesapeake Bay seagrass, Dr. Orth, retired at the peak, and my postdoc advisor, Chris Patrick, took over to oversee the biggest dieback in the whole time that we were monitoring, right? And so, in a panic, Chris hires me on as a postdoc, and it's up to us to put on our ecological detective hats and figure out what is it that's changed in the bay to create these massive swings, all this variation in the last 5 years, right? This has a big effect on what the future is going to look like. So let me give you a little bit of history of seagrass over in the Chesapeake Bay. So eelgrass has been the Chesapeake's #1 seagrass for centuries. This is the dominant iconic species that has these linguine-like blades that are in the water column pretty much the whole year. They support all the blue crabs, all the shrimp, fish that are so prolific in the Chesapeake Bay. The problem is that eelgrass is near its southern limit and the Chesapeake Bay is getting hotter. So what this graph shows here is this band across is the temperature threshold for eelgrass, and every time this line hits that band, that's when summer temperatures got too hot for eelgrass. And this had a pretty clear cause and effect where these marine heat waves start to knock back the historic dominant. So you may be wondering what's going on here, right? I've talked about a recovery. Now we're talking about big variation and die-offs. So, what is it? Is eelgrass the bay's last hope? Is it the only hope for seagrass? And no, I'll quote Yoda, no, there is another seagrass. And that seagrass is widgeon grass. Widgeon grass is a more opportunistic, weedy species, often shunted into the margins of the shallows and brackish areas. It has these angel hair-like blades that stay short until a brief foray up into the water column for a month in the summer when their reproductive shoots transform the meadow from like a lawn to like an underwater forest. And what's really cool about widgeon grass is, because it lives in the shallows, it is unaffected by high temperatures. And so if we look at the monitoring data over time, we can see that the Chesapeake Bay can be 40% widgeon grass at any given time. And so what this basically means, if we look at the bay-wide trends across all the grass in the bay, that's what this black line is here. A good year for widgeon grass is a great year for the Chesapeake Bay, and a bad year for widgeon grass is a tragic year for the Chesapeake Bay. So now it's up to us to understand what causes these big booms and busts. We knew a ton about eelgrass. It's globally distributed, so well studied, but really comparatively little to widgeon grass because it wasn't that important before under less novel environmental conditions. So to understand what the climate and human stressors that control year-to-year change in this opportunistic seagrass species, we assembled a team of seagrass ecologists, hydrological modelers, watershed modelers, aerial mappers, managers, policymakers who can get stuff implemented, and we all put on our ecological detective hats. And so we assembled this 40 years of water quality data, aerial survey data for seagrasses, and a really cool citizen science data set that does point counts of specific underwater grass species over time. Ultimately, we end up uniting these with structural equation modeling and this really cool upstream to downstream approach that I just wanted to point out here, where basically we can see what changes to watersheds trickle downstream, right? So what do our results look like? So basically, what we found was that the watersheds that are most responsible for those big swings in widgeon grass are the ones with more agriculture and more development. Specifically, we saw that it was non-point sources of nitrogen and phosphorus that get washed down the rivers during really rainy springs. And they cloud the water with phytoplankton blooms, specifically while widgeon grass is still very short. I think I have a short widget. Yeah, there's short widget grass. When it's still short before it does that foray up into the water column, um, and uh, and yeah, so this is when it cuts off the light, causes big diebacks of whole meadows. And this is really interesting because this tells us that there isn't just a change in the dominant seagrass in the Chesapeake Bay, but there's a change in the dominant stressor. It's not temperature anymore. Now it's flow-driven nutrient loads, which weirdly is good news because we know that we can control the nutrient loads. It's been done before. So let's check back in, come back to Florida. Let's check back in my hometown in Tampa. Well, it's so rarely good news when seagrass is making headlines. And yeah, seagrass in Tampa Bay also has suffered a few setbacks from when I had put those graphs up earlier. And if we dive into the species-specific data, we can see almost the same thing. So this fantastic data from the Tampa Bay Estuary Program shows us that shoalgrass, an opportunistic species, this is Haloduli wrightii, was the species like most responsible for the recovery and then also for dieback, just like widgeon grass in the bay. And so this 2016 and 2020 die-off, these appear to be shoalgrass events. What's really interesting too is the precipitation data indicates that it was pretty rainy either right before or during the years of these diebacks. Now, whether or not this is the ultimate cause, the point still stands here, which is that Tampa Bay, like the Chesapeake Bay, it has the light conditions for successful seagrass growth under the old rules. However, it appears that water quality is not yet resistant enough to handle these extremes like big rainfall events. And the new opportunistic dominant itself is not very resistant to these conditions. It's resilient, it can bounce back, right? But if we're looking for consistent seagrass cover, we have to make water quality more resilient to extremes. So to bring it back how I started this with talking about seagrass's effect on fish, let me quickly look at some results for how climate-driven species substitutions affect fish communities. This is interesting. You could kind of see it both ways. A grass is a grass, but all species are different. What do we find here? So this is some work that we did in Virginia. Lauren Alvaro, recent master's graduate, where we did fish trawls in these different meadows. And what we found is that there are differences in the fish community. Generally, they're smaller, less diverse. But the really interesting one is that there appears to be less like fish food, shrimp, amphipods, small crabs and stuff in the widgeon grass areas of the Chesapeake Bay. If this is going to have knock-on effects down the road, we don't really know yet, but these are the sort of consequences that we have to be paying attention to, and is what some of the stuff I'm going to talk about in the second half of my talk. So, in summary, right, the combination of climate and human impacts, they shift dominant species, and the management plans may become obsolete. Now, with these seagrass examples, we've got evidence that like we can still pull that lever that works. So just have to do more and pay attention to these shifts and stuff, right? So on top of that, how can management stay ahead of everything? Species shifting due to climate change is common, right? And so describing these causes and consequences, this is critical if we want to keep resilient systems. So I'm going to end today with some examples of what my students and I have been up to here on the Nature Coast and beyond over the last year and a half or so in a segment that I'm calling Chomping Through Change, a Gator Guide for Next Gen Management. Because a ton of our research, what we're doing out here at NCBS, is about how to turn this uncertainty into resilience. So here's a step-by-step guide. First one, really, really easy, which is to go to the tip of the spear for change. Well, if you're in the Nature Coast, you're already there. Congratulations. we simultaneously have things at the top and bottom of food webs shifting, tropicalizing, moving north with temperature rise and climate change, right? Foundation species like mangroves are marching up the coast. We're very much at the tip of the spear for that. Um, there's also really interesting oyster to mangrove transitions documented by Stephen Hesterberg down in Tampa Bay. The progression of ghost forest due to sea level rise is really prominent here. We actually have the longest monitored ghost forest monitoring here along the Nature Coast. And there's, of course, the famous snook tropicalization with snook numbers increasing up here in the northern parts of the Gulf due to temperature rise. So, you got to go to these places where the shifts are happening because this is the information that's gonna be translatable to other areas, to other places. Next step is to work to build an early warning system. So we need to use a combination of imaging, modeling, a survey, on the ground surveys to figure out when these shifts are going to occur, where these shifts are occurring. I didn't really get to this part of the story, but we almost missed it in the Chesapeake Bay. It was because of that on the ground point count survey that we were able to see some of these shifts in species. So, we can't get caught off guard by shifts in environmental conditions or in foundation species. And so, we've got the technology to do this in coastal ecosystems. Combining on the ground stuff with drones and airplanes and satellite imagery, working all together to do some of this like foundation species monitoring. The in the water stuff super important. We're currently in really good shape here in the Nature Coast, thanks to the hard work from Project Coast, the water management districts, DEP, National Estuary Programs are doing a really killer job here. Saya and Morgan are killing it. And the thing is like we need all of this detailed data if we want to do the mechanistic modeling that I was able to do in the Chesapeake Bay and that Marcus Beck was able to do in Tampa Bay, right? Because these changes in water quality, changes in foundation species, right? We can get to the mechanisms if we've got long enough, good enough data. And so this is how the early warning system starts to develop. In my lab, we're working on an early warning system to detect and predict shifts in coastal vegetation. This is went wrong direction. This is a set of projects spearheaded by my incoming PhD student, Miranda Mays. Her undergrad, Elise Corley, is working on an honors thesis related to coastal habitat shift along the Gulf. We're interested really in all aspects of this, especially on the islands here around Cedar Key. And so Miranda's working on a couple of really cool things to determine the relative role of both abrupt and gradual climate change on coastal dunes, marshes, mangroves, coastal forests, using remote sensing and GIS and ground surveys. So for the abrupt changes, Miranda's looking at which coastal habitats are more or less resistant and resilient to hurricanes and how background climate change affects that resistance and resilience. That's this picture on the top here, NDVI, before and after Hurricane Helene on one of our islands out here. And then for the gradual change, she's also working on she's also working on how sea level rise and changing in temperature minimums are affecting the different types of coastal vegetation here. Here in the Cedar Keys and the National Wildlife Refuge around here. She's finding that islands are losing coastal forests, gaining mangroves, and that the patterns and rates of these changes are potentially really different out on islands versus the mainlands. And of course, shifting foundation species, this isn't the only high profile shift that's going on here in the Nature Coast, right? Pretty famously, I mentioned it before, snook predators are shifting north as well. My grad student, my PhD student, Alex Wallace, she got a Florida Forage Fish Fellowship to study not just the individual species shifts, but how fish communities are responding to increased temperatures. Are fish communities shifting over time? And then how does that affect Gulf Coast food webs? This is a really cool and interesting project because these forage fish, these are the linchpin of seagrass food webs. And so changes in them is going to have top-down effects and bottom-up effects. So this is a really cool project that's part of building this early warning system, right? We wouldn't have known about the snook thing if it wasn't for the fisheries independent monitoring data. So we want to try to figure out how are whole communities potentially changing along the Gulf, along the Nature Coast. So next step, so I'm a manipulative field ecologist by trade, and step 3 is really about using experiments to quantify the functional consequences. So the example that I'm going to share here is also from Alex's PhD, where we're working on she's implemented this really cool space for time design to try to understand how top-down control is different along a tropicalization gradient. So each of her plots essentially simulates a different place in Florida, right? Mangrove dominated, marsh and mangrove mixed, marsh dominated. And what she's doing is she has these predator exclusion treatments out there to try to understand how the trophic interactions that we know cascade down to productivity, decomposition, and sedimentation in marshes, how they change as mangroves encroach. This is a really cool long-term and fun experiment that is going to be running for its second year here this coming summer. These are what these cages look like. It's cool stuff. Last is the last step in the Gator Guide for Next Gen Management is about future-ready restoration. So to get restoration ready for the future, which the future is now, by the way, this involves a lot, including tech to help scale up, including better funding avenues, this sort of thing. But today, I'm really just going to be talking about how to leverage ecology and bright spots to get ready and to amp people up for the future. So first off, if climate tolerant species are beginning to take over, let's start to use them for restoration, right? For seagrass restoration, many regions, the restoration is focused on pretty narrow species pools. When we were in Virginia, Marc Hensel, is a postdoc in Laura Reynolds' lab, did this really cool experiment using both the persistent and the opportunistic species for seagrass restoration. And this really harnesses the rise of these climate tolerant species. And so by using both widgeon grass and eelgrass together, this pilot restoration that she did increased its total area by 98%. So essentially, managers need seeds from all different types of species in their pockets to be adaptable and to restore with species that have a chance of making it into the future. Ecological theory also tells us that positive interactions are more important under stressful conditions. So what is the role of positive interactions in an inherently stressful condition of restoration? Me and Laura's grad student, Kay, is diving into this, specifically diving into the range of effects that filter feeders like bivalves can have on seagrass, and then also on seagrass restoration. She's been through thousands of papers, and she's finding that these benefits are likely context dependent. She's going to be using all of these insights to design experiments to help determine when and where seagrass and bivalve associations are important, where co-restoration might work and might not work. I'm also excited that we're really diving into an awesome statewide sea grant DEP project to understand how clam and seagrass interactions vary across a variety of conditions in Florida. Our newest lab member, Katie Cummings, is spearheading this, and this is going to be really, really fun stuff that's going to be in the water here in a couple months. So lastly, there's a lot of bad in the world, and it's really easy to feel like we can't make a difference. And so I think that future-ready restoration also has to include bright spots and also what we can learn from those bright spots. So one really cool example of that is the restoration in Virginia coastal bays. This is outside of the Chesapeake Bay. This is led by Dr. J.J. Orth, where in 2001 they planted 500 acres by hand, or well, seeded like this, like in this video here. And these cool, clear waters of the coastal bays, they were just starved for seeds. And this has turned into the largest and most successful coastal restoration in the world. As the seagrass returns, so did fish. There's a potential scallop fishing industry that potentially could be arising soon. So much. This is so successful that Virginia enacted a law instituting a seagrass carbon market. I think that hasn't quite gotten off the ground yet, but it's there and it's from a restoration, which is really, really cool. And this provides a blueprint for seagrass restoration. It's another really important blueprint that exists, closer to home. I think that hope springs forth from the Cedar Key Living Shoreline Project, spearheaded by Savannah Berry and Mark Clark. And this is really a truly incredible transformation that has slowed down coastal erosion to a halt and even reduces wave impacts during hurricanes, right? We're talking about the difference between replacing a garage door and replacing your whole first floor from these living shorelines. I know this is not a quite exact same angle, but this is a little video that I took just a few weeks ago. Actually, longer than that because the grass is green. So what do you do with that success? How do you actually like scale up these bright spots? Well, you turn it into lessons, right? And so you get the word out. You shout about it from the rooftop. Get Jim Cantori out reporting on the living shorelines. Heck, write a book about it. Because these successes, they need to be championed. Bright spots matter because they reveal where restoration is succeeding, and this gives us a blueprint for what we can scale up instead of guessing. So that's my Gator guide for next gen management. That my lab and I are working on a lot of this stuff. I hope this resonates with some of y'all. And so as we start to prepare for this future, we can kind of edit this diagram a bit, right? So global change does create ecosystems with fundamentally different stressors and species, but our interdisciplinary approaches, our cross-sector partnerships can turn this into proactive and research-driven management, and same with future-ready restoration. And so together this turns uncertainty into resilience, and the future of the nature coast, it depends not on what has been done in the past, but how quickly and ambitiously we act now. So thank you guys for listening, and I'll take any questions.
All right. Thanks so much, Mark. And you guys should be seeing poll pop up soon if you haven't already. And we did have one question come in, so I'll go ahead and read you that one. And then if folks have others, feel free to go in the chat or raise your hand and you can unmute and ask your question verbally if you prefer. So the first question we have is wondering about the impact of the last freeze on the migrating mangroves in the Nature Coast.
Yeah, great question, James. I mean, the short answer is the mangroves are impacted for sure. Yeah, we're working on some research that we're going to get going. I mean, pretty much as soon as I get done with this call on getting out there and quantifying differences. Yeah, we're seeing some really cool stuff. We've got a set of sites lined up based on a really cool survey done from the 2022 freeze by a grad student, Calvin Yang, sorry, who did this in the 2022 freeze. So we're going to revisit those sites. We're going to look for species-specific differences. Yeah, we got some really cool work planned on that. But yeah, the mangroves have gotten pretty toasted.
Yeah, it's really impressive to see the amount of unhappy mangroves out there just driving over the Cedar Key Bridge.
Yeah, and we're seeing a lot of cool
Um,
differences too, from like place to place based on species and stuff like that. Yeah, it's really interesting.
yeah.
I'm excited.
And there is another question in the chat, but I saw Fia's hand go up before that, so go ahead, Fia.
Hi, Mark. Great talk. I like the story. I was watching the video of the seeds just being tossed out, and I thought that was really cool. I hadn't heard about that. And I'm wondering, is that something that is feasible to do with Haladuli in the Nature Coast or in Tampa Bay, like something like that? That you know of?
Like sea-based restoration.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know about Haladuli. I do know that there's usually the research is more focused on the species that used to be dominant or that are currently dominant, and so a lot of the secondary species are we don't know a ton about how to restore with them. That was a big push at our lab at VIMS, was basically like kind of backtracking and figuring out what are the methods for doing this with widgeon grass because they were different than eelgrass. And so, yeah, the exact question I don't know the answer to. I think that probably Laura maybe does, but yeah, the thing is though is that like it's usually different for one reason or another, but it does open up this like really cool avenue for more important restoration research.
Cool. Thank you.
All right, and the next question is, why is studying mangrove encroachment important?
You know, so foundation species are are the base of many ecosystems, especially coastal ecosystems. And so the structure and health of foundation species has a huge impact on food webs, on ecosystem functioning, on ecosystem services. The values that we get from coastal ecosystems have to do with how well the foundation species are doing. And so inherently, when you go from a grass to a tree, there's going to be pretty cool and interesting differences. And I think that a lot of it has to do with the different structural and functions from these different foundation species. So I think it's a really cool ecological phenomenon, and it's happening right in front of our eyes, and that in and of itself is important to study.
And a follow-up to Fia's question, what is, do we have widgeon grass in the Big Bend?
Yeah, I don't think it's I don't know how common it is, but yeah, yes is the answer.
All right. I don't see any other hands up or questions in the chat.
Dr.
So,
Reynolds.
Can I ask
oh,
it? Mark, can you talk a little bit about the potential differences in functions if we in the you said a little bit between Ripia and Zostra, but what are the differences in functions of those early colonizing species and those more persistent species?
Yeah, great question, Laura. And the answer is, there's some similarities to my answer to Fia's question, which is that this is an open area for a lot of research, for one reason or another, right? I mean, it kind of makes sense that the dominant species are the ones that have been most studied. But as other things start to pop up as being important, we gotta do some backtracking. And so, but what's cool about seagrasses is there's kind of a set of life history traits that go along with the like opportunistic or persistent type of seagrass. And so like the opportunistic seagrasses like widgeon grass, their productivity rates are much higher, right? But they're like less permanent, so to speak. So they kind of like run hard and fast, and they have the potential to flash on and off in their abundances, like I showed in the Chesapeake Bay example. So does that like high productivity translate to sequestering more carbon? Probably not, but we don't really know. I think, yeah, totally open about like differences in nutrient cycle stuff too. Well, I'm not totally open, but I mean, I think that there's yeah, plenty more research to do on that front as well. And then yeah, with the like coastal, so I talked about like habitat provisioning for like nursery habitats and stuff for fish a bit, where it seems like the thinner bladed opportunistic plants provides a little bit less habitat for fish food. I think that we probably would see more I guess less of a trade-off when it comes to things like coastal protection, depending on like what time of the year storms came through, that sort of thing. And that in that sense, like having grass there is better than nothing, which is almost always the case. But yeah, I think that there's some clear functional trade-offs, and then a lot of functional trade-offs that still need to be quantified.
all right. We had a couple more questions come in. One is, can we glue seeds to rocks to weigh them down when planting them in water versus hand planting? And second part is, what budget do you need to breed better species for this changing temperature?
Yeah, cool question. So the seeds usually sink. In fact, the seeds that float are usually ones that we toss out because there's something wrong with them. So the seeds do sink, and that's like a natural thing that goes along with how seagrasses reproduce, right? They drop their seeds, they might float along a little bit, but then they sink down. Um, yeah, and then to breed a better species for this changing temperature. So yeah, I mean, this is a really interesting thing that I didn't get that much into in this talk, but like, um, agriculture has, they're way ahead of us when it comes to seed-based restoration or seed-based planting of things, right? Now, of course, they've benefited from decades of government subsidies and a lot of help in this front where we haven't, right? But the advances in seagrass genetics are they're like leaps and bounds every year, and so like this is something that's being worked on. What's cool about eelgrass in the Chesapeake Bay is there are areas around the world. It's a globally distributed species, and there's areas around the world that where the eelgrass can handle higher temperatures. And so, looking at the genetics of that species, of that region, has some value as well. Um, Budget-wise, I'd say a couple million.
Nice. All right. The next is kind of a comment that they wanted to watch this webinar for two reasons: understanding environmental changes going on in the Big Bend, and also the success at their fishing sweet spots has changed, and an offer to be available for data. So follow up with us by email, and we can let you know about the opportunities to get involved in that. I don't know if you want to comment on any of that too, Mark. Okay, we have another question. Hello, I'm a full-time guide here in Crystal River, Florida. Over the past few years, I've been seeing large areas of seagrass beds dying off, and it seems to be getting worse each season. Since I'm on the water almost every day, I'm seeing this firsthand, and I'm concerned about the long-term impacts on water quality and the ecosystem. I've tried multiple times over the years to get DEP and SwiftMod to come out and look into it, but haven't had much luck. Who is the correct contact or department to report this to, and what steps can be taken to get an official site visit or investigation started?
Yeah, well, I got great news for you, Justin. The people are on this call. Savannah Berry and Laura Reynolds would be the ones to alert to these sites. I would be surprised if they weren't already surveying these areas, but yeah, potential hotspots for change is definitely something that we're always wanting to know about. Especially as like yeah people that are there a lot and seeing the changes happen. This is really important to alert us to. So yeah, we appreciate that, and yeah, you can get in touch with any of the hosts of this seminar.
Yeah, and I'll just add on there that we do have funding from DEP to monitor. We have folks that go out and monitor seagrasses every year, and we write an annual report based on that data, and that program has been around since 2021. And DEP has other programs that have been in existence much longer. And so we did actually, in our most recent seagrass report, document some concerning trends in Crystal River specifically. So if you do want to follow up with me, I can send you that report and you can see if it matches what you're seeing, or if you would like to highlight some other areas that maybe aren't covered by our sampling stations. Like Mark said, we're always interested in hearing concerns directly from the community, and we work with a lot of other guides in the Crystal River and Homosassa area that have brought things such as seagrass propeller scarring to our attention in specific areas for that. So, not to take the floor from Mark, but Justin, all that to say that we should definitely talk more about that. All right, next question is, are there any current seagrass restoration programs you know of in South Florida?
Well, it was funny that you ended with not to take the floor from Mark there, Savannah, because I was about to toss this one back over to you guys. But I don't mind. I've been talking for an hour.
Okay. Um, well, we actually had one of our attendees weigh in that Lake Worth Lagoon initiative is a good one to look into. Laura, are you aware of work in South Florida? I mostly work in this region, so I'm not as keyed in on South Florida stuff.
There's a couple places. I would say more in the southwest estuaries, a little bit potentially in Biscayne Bay. There's also some statewide initiatives led by Moat, looking at where we should restore seagrasses and what plants we should use. So there are several programs, and I'm happy to send some links if you'd like to send me an email. I'll be happy to send you some links and some contacts for those programs.
Okay, awesome. And then one more question. Are you seeing changes in fish migration?
Yeah, that's a cool question. I'm guessing this is in reference to my student Alex's project. So I would say that the results are still coming in. Like we're like in the beginning of this project. And really, I should have said this during the talk, but I hope that I get invited back in like 2 years or so to really to update on all the new stuff that we started over this last like year and a half or so. The answers that I'm comfortable giving on if we're seeing like community level tropicalization here in the Gulf are probably yes. We don't know exactly who in the community is shifting, but we do see differences in species richness over time at some of these sites that we're looking at all throughout the Gulf. And yeah, there's potentially going to be some really cool stuff, but too early to give any details though.
And I will also say that I'll pop a link in the chat to the overall Nature Coast Currents website where you can find the archive. And we have had some presentations in the past about snook and some other species with a backbone in in the past. So you might want to just check those out as well. And then another answer we're crowdsourcing the answer to the South Florida restoration, and that Lignum Vitae Key Botanical State Park also has um, some seagrass restoration going on. And yeah. All right. Well, that was a very lively Q&A session. We're nearing the end of our hour. So I want to thank you all so much again for attending and for your attention. And also thank you in advance for any follow-up conversations that we might have from this talk. And our next presentation is March 18th, Wednesday at 2 p.m. on the 18th. And it's going to be from Dr. Jamie Lewitzo, and she's going to talk to us about science communication and engagement projects that have been done out in this region. We've had a lot of requests from people to talk more about science communication. So tune in next month for that. And thanks again, Mark.
Thank you guys.